The phone jolted me awake at 6:03 a.m., its shrill ring slicing through the hum of my city apartment. I fumbled for it, knocking over a half-empty coffee mug from last night's work sprint. The screen flashed an unknown number, but something told me to answer. Alex? Alex Richards? The voice on the other end trembled, familiar yet frayed with age. It's Mrs. Thompson. You know, from Meadow Creek. You're Grandpa Joe's neighbor. I sat up, rubbing sleep from my eyes. Mrs. Thompson, white hair always in a bun, hands tough from decades of gardening, had lived next to Grandpa Joe's farm for 40 years. She'd baked me oatmeal cookies every summer I'd visited as a kid. Mrs. Thompson, hi. Is everything okay? My voice was groggy, still tangled in dreams of deadlines and emails. No, honey, it's not. Her words came fast, sharp with anger. They're building houses on your land. Big yellow machines started digging yesterday, tearing up the east fields where Joe grew his corn. You need to come quick. I blinked, my brain struggling to catch up. Wait, what? Houses? On my land? Last March, when Grandpa Joe passed, he'd left me his 200-acre farm just outside Meadow Creek. I hadn't been there since the funeral, too busy with my job, a soul-crushing gig at a marketing firm where I churned out ads for toothpaste and car insurance. The farm was a distant memory, a patchwork of green fields and dusty barns I'd meant to visit someday. They're calling it Sunny Pines East, Mrs. Thompson said. Fancy signs went up overnight, 96 luxury homes starting at $450,000. I saw the bulldozers myself, Alex. Dust everywhere, like a storm rolling in. Your grandpa would have marched out there with his shotgun if he were still here. My stomach twisted. Grandpa Joe loved that land. He'd inherited it from his father, who'd gotten it from his father before him. For generations of millers had tilled that soil, coaxing corn and soybeans from it, fishing in the creek that snaked through the eastern edge. I could still hear his gravelly voice from those summer nights on the porch, "This farm's our blood, Alex. Never let it go." The idea of strangers carving it up for cookie-cutter mansions felt wrong, like a punch to the gut. Are you sure it's my property? I asked, clinging to a shred of hope. Maybe they're on the wrong side of the line. No mistake, she cut in. Those Sunny Pines people have been sniffing around for months. Before Joe got sick, I saw suits showing up at his door, fancy cars, briefcases, the works. He'd send M packing, red in the face, shouting about thieves in ties. One time, I heard him arguing with some county man right on the driveway. Joe slammed the door so hard the hinges rattled. Then he got quiet, like he was planning something. I swung my legs out of bed, the cold floor jolting me fully awake. Suits. County man. Why didn't he tell me? Joe had been frail his last year, but his mind stayed sharp as a tack. If developers were harassing him, he'd have fought tooth and nail, or at least called me. Wouldn't he? He didn't want to worry you, Mrs. Thompson said softly. You were busy in the city, and he was proud of that. But Alex, this is serious. They're moving fast. You've got to get here. I glanced around my tiny apartment, peeling paint, a desk buried under laptops and takeout boxes. 5 hours away, my inheritance was being ripped apart. I'm coming, I said, already yanking a suitcase from the closet. Today. Be careful, she added. These folks don't play nice. Joe always said they'd do anything to get what they want. I hung up, my heart pounding. I threw clothes into the bag, jeans, a hoodie, whatever I could grab, barely registering the chaos of my morning. The drive to Meadow Creek was a blur. I pushed my beat-up sedan past speed limits, the city's gray sprawl giving way to rolling hills and patchy forests. My mind churned with memories, Joe teaching me to drive the tractor, the two of us laughing as we pulled catfish from the creek, the way he'd point at the stars and say, "That's your land down there, kid." Yours forever. By noon, I turned onto the dirt road leading to the farm. It was narrower than I remembered, overgrown with weeds since I'd last walked it for Joe's funeral. The air smelled of earth and pine, just like it always had, until a low rumble broke the peace. As I crested the hill overlooking the eastern fields, my breath caught. Dust clouds billowed above the trees, thick and choking. The growl of engines grew louder, and then I saw them, a fleet of bulldozers and excavators clawing at the ground where golden corn once swayed. Workers in neon vests swarmed the site, spray-painting orange lines across the torn-up soil. I slammed on the brakes, staring. A giant sign loomed near the road, future home of Sunny Pines East, 96 luxury homes starting at $450,000. Luxury homes? On my land? My hands tightened on the wheel. This wasn't a mistake. This was a takeover. I stepped out, the wind carrying grit into my eyes. The fields Joe had tended, where he'd shown me how to plant seeds, where we'd watched storms roll in from the porch, were gone. In their place, a war zone of dirt and metal stretched as far as I could see. My chest ached, a mix of rage and grief bubbling up. Who were these people? How did they think they could steal what was mine? Then I spotted her, a woman standing apart from the workers, clipboard in hand, her beige pants and white blouse spotless despite the dust. She was on her phone, her voice cutting through the noise, calm and practiced. Her hair was perfect, not a strand out of place, like she'd stepped out of a magazine ad. This had to be someone in charge. I marched toward her, my boots sinking into the churned-up earth. "Excuse me," I called, loud enough to make her turn. She lowered the phone, eyeing me up and down like I was some lost hiker. "What's happening here?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We're preparing for residential development." Diane Reynolds, Sunny Pines Homeowners Association president. She offered her hand, but I didn't take it. "This is my land," I said, voice steady despite the fire in my gut. "My grandfather, Joe Miller, owned this farm. He died last year, and it's mine now. You can't build here." Her smile tightened. "There must be some misunderstanding. Sunny Pines purchased this parcel months ago. Everything's legal." She tilted her head, almost pitying me. "Perhaps he didn't tell you." "He wouldn't sell," I snapped. "Not this place. Not ever." Diane shrugged, already turning back to her phone. "Take it up with our legal team. We've got a schedule to keep." I stood there, fists clenched, as she walked away. The bulldozers roared on, tearing deeper into my family's history. Mrs. Thompson was right, Joe would have fought this. And now, it was up to me. I stood there, dust swirling around my boots, watching Diane Reynolds strut back to her clipboard like she owned the place. The bulldozers didn't stop, blades slicing into the earth, spitting out clumps of soil where Grandpa Joe's soybeans used to grow. My throat burned, not just from the grit in the air but from the helpless fury boiling inside me. This was my land. My family's land. And she acted like I was the one trespassing. I took a step forward, ready to shout her down, when a shadow moved beside me. A worker in a faded orange vest, his hard hat crooked, shuffled over, glancing nervously at Diane's back. He was young, maybe 20, with sunburned cheeks and dirt-streaked hands. "Hey, you Joe Miller's kin," he muttered, keeping his voice low. "Yeah," I said, eyeing him. "Grandson." "Why?" He hesitated, then slipped something into my hand, a crumpled scrap of paper, damp with sweat. "Check the old barn," he whispered, barely moving his lips. "Joe left something. Don't tell nobody I said it." Before I could ask what he meant, he darted off, blending into the swarm of workers marking the ground with orange paint. I shoved the note into my pocket, my pulse kicking up. "Left something? In the barn?" Grandpa wasn't one for riddles, but he loved his secrets, little hiding spots he'd show me as a kid, like the hollow fence post where he stashed fishing lures. I wanted to chase the kid down, demand answers, but Diane was already barking orders, her voice sharp over the rumble of engines. I'd deal with the barn later. Right now, I needed her to listen. Excuse me. I called again, louder this time, stomping toward her. She turned, phone still pressed to her ear, her perfect eyebrows arching like I was a bug she'd rather squash. We're not done here. She sighed, lowering the phone with exaggerated patience. I told you, Mr. Richards. Alex Richards. I crossed my arms, planting myself between her and the nearest excavator. You say you bought this land 9 months ago. That's impossible. Grandpa Joe died last March, and he'd never sell. This farm's been ours for generations. Diane's smile was thin, practiced, like she'd rehearsed it in a mirror. I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Richards, but there must be some confusion. Sunny Pines Development acquired this parcel legally. We have permits, approvals, everything in order. Perhaps your grandfather didn't share the details. Her tone dripped with fake sympathy, like she was talking to a kid who'd lost a toy. He didn't sell, I said, my voice rising. He was sick his last year, sure, but his mind was clear. He loved this place, lived for it. If he'd sold, I'd know. She tilted her head, sizing me up. People don't always tell their families everything. The sale was finalized 9 months ago, right around when he passed, yes. We've been planning this expansion for years. It's a done deal. She flicked her eyes past me, already dismissing me. Now, if you'll excuse me, we're on a tight schedule. A done deal? My fists clenched. 9 months ago, I was at Joe's bedside in the hospital, holding his rough hand as he rasped about the farm, how the creek flooded every spring, how the soil turned red after a rain. He never mentioned suits or sales. Something stank here, and it wasn't just the diesel fumes. I want to see the documents, I said, stepping closer. The sale papers, the permits, whatever you've got. Diane didn't flinch, but her smile tightened. You're welcome to contact our legal department. She pulled a business card from her clipboard and handed it over, her manicured nails gleaming in the sun. I assure you, it's all above board. Now, please, step aside. We have work to do. I took the card, Diane Reynolds, President, Sunny Pines HOA, and stared at it, the glossy print mocking me. This isn't over, I said, locking eyes with her. You're tearing up my land, and I'm not walking away. She didn't reply, just turned on her heel sinking slightly into the dirt as she dialed her phone again. Yes, Thomas, we've got a small issue, I heard her say, voice fading into the noise. The machines roared on, flattening another stretch of field. I wanted to grab a shovel and start swinging, but that wouldn't stop them, not yet. Back at my car, I leaned against the hood, the metal warm under my palms. The construction site sprawled before me like a wound, raw, ugly, unstoppable. Dust hung thick in the air, coating my tongue, stinging my eyes. Beyond the chaos, I could just make out the farmhouse, its sagging roof peeking through the trees. 5 hours ago, I'd been in my city bubble, stressing over ad copy. Now I was here, watching strangers get my heritage. I pulled the worker's note from my pocket, smoothing it out. Check the old barn. Joe left something. The barn sat on the western edge of the property, a weathered heap of gray planks and rusted nails. I hadn't been inside since I was a teenager, when Joe and I fixed an old tractor in there, grease on our hands, country music crackling from his radio. Could he have hidden something, proof he hadn't sold out? The sun was dipping low, painting the sky orange, when I heard tires crunching behind me. Mrs. Thompson's beat-up pickup rolled up, her face grim through the windshield. She climbed out, a pitcher of iced tea in her hands, her flowered apron dusted with flour. You saw it, then, she said, nodding toward the destruction. Told you it was bad. Yeah. I took the tea she offered, the cold glass grounding me. Met their boss, Diane Reynolds. Claims they bought the land fair and square. Mrs. Thompson snorted. Bought it? Joe would have burned the deed before letting that woman near his farm. She's trouble, Alex. Smooth as silk, but mean as a snake. Mean or not, she's got bulldozers, I said, watching another scoop of dirt hit the ground. And I've got nothing but questions. She set the pitcher down on my hood, her eyes sharp. Then start looking for answers. Joe didn't give up easy. Neither should you. I nodded, the note burning a hole in my pocket. The barn was my next stop. Whatever Joe left, it was time to find it, before Diane's machines buried everything he'd fought for. The farmhouse smelled like time, like pipe tobacco clinging to the walls, old books yellowing on shelves, and the faint tang of earth Joe tracked in on his boots. I stood in the doorway of his office, a small room off the kitchen I hadn't touched since the funeral. Dust motes danced in the slanting afternoon light, and the silence pressed against me, heavy with memories. Mrs. Thompson had gone home, leaving me with her iced tea and a fire in my belly. Diane Reynolds thought she'd won, but I wasn't done, not by a long shot. I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under my weight. The office was a shrine to Joe's life, shelves stuffed with farming almanacs, a cracked leather chair where he'd smoked his pipe, a chipped mug still sitting on the desk like he'd just stepped out for a minute. I'd avoided this room last March, too raw from losing him to sift through his things. Now, with bulldozers tearing up the east fields and that worker's note, check the old barn. Joe left something, burning in my mind, I needed answers. If Joe hadn't sold, something in here might prove it. Mrs. Thompson's words echoed as I started searching. They showed up 3 months ago, she'd said, her voice tight on the porch. Men with measuring tools, poking around the edges of the property. Joe was furious, kept saying they had no right, that they were trying to steal what wasn't theirs. She'd poured me more tea, her hands shaking. Did he mention selling? I'd asked. Never, she'd snapped, eyes watering. He swore this farm would stay in the family forever. The day before he went to the hospital for the last time, he was in here, rummaging. Said he needed something important to protect the land. Protect the land. That was Joe, stubborn as a mule, always one step ahead. I pulled open the filing cabinet, its metal screeching in protest. Folders spilled out, organized by year in his neat handwriting, crop yields, rainfall logs, receipts for tractor parts. He'd tracked everything, a farmer's diary stretching back decades. I flipped through 2023, nothing about Sunny Pines or land sales. Hours slipped by, my eyes stinging from faded ink and cramped notes. The barn nagged at me, but I couldn't leave this room empty-handed. Night fell, the windows turning black. I switched on the desk lamp, its weak glow casting shadows over the mess I'd made, papers strewn across the floor, drawers yanked open. My stomach growled, I hadn't eaten since the gas station sandwich on the drive. Just as I leaned back, ready to call it quits, my foot nudged something under the desk. The floorboard shifted, a soft thunk breaking the quiet. I froze, then pressed again. It wobbled. Heart pounding, I dropped to my knees and grabbed a letter opener from the desk. The board popped loose with a groan, revealing a shallow hole in the floor. Inside sat a small metal box, rusted at the edges, the kind Joe used to store shotgun shells. A key dangled from a nail under the desk, glinting in the lamplight. My hands shook as I unlocked it. The lid creaked open, and there it was, a stack of papers, yellowed and crisp, tied with twine. On top, a letter in Joe's slanted scrawl, addressed to me. Alex, it began, if you're reading this, then someone's trying to take what's ours. My breath caught. I sank onto the floor, the cold wood biting through my jeans, and read on. Developers have been after this land for years. Sunny Pines sent their sharks, suits with smiles, pushing papers I wouldn't sign. In my last months, one kept coming back, saying it was just a road easement. Different papers every time, but I never gave in. If they say I sold, it's a lie. Look at the 1910 survey. The truth's in the boundaries. A chill ran through me. Joe knew. He'd seen this coming, even as cancer ate him up. I untied the twine, spreading the papers out. The deed to the farm, naming me his heir. His will, notarized and clear. Then the surveys, 1910, brittle as dead leaves, and another from 1978, both showing the property at 280 acres, not the 200 I'd always heard. My jaw dropped. The eastern boundary stretched further than I'd imagined, swallowing not just the construction site but land where Sunny Pines already stood. There was more. A faded photo slipped from the pile, a younger Joe, maybe 50, standing by the creek with a man in a cheap suit, both smiling stiffly. On the back, in Joe's writing, "Trust broken, 1997, R. Daniels, County Clerk." My mind raced. 1997. That was when Mrs. Thompson said Joe got quiet after a big fight with some official. Had this Daniels guy screwed him over? Betrayed him? I dug deeper, pulling out a folded map, hand-drawn by Joe. It matched the 1910 survey, with notes in red ink, creek bed shifted 84, county adjusted line wrong. Another, 1,997, 80 acres gone. Forged. Forged. The word hit like a hammer. If Sunny Pines' claim rested on a fake boundary change, this wasn't just a mistake, it was theft. I sat back, the papers trembling in my hands. Outside, crickets chirped, a stark contrast to the chaos in my head. Joe hadn't just left me a farm, he'd left me a fight. A trap, maybe, set long before he died. But why hide it here? Why not tell me outright? Maybe he'd tried, in those last calls I'd rushed through, too busy to really listen. Guilt gnawed at me, sharp and cold. The barn still loomed in my thoughts, but this box was gold. Proof Diane's done deal was built on sand, or worse, a crime. I spread the surveys across the desk, comparing them to a newer map I'd grabbed from my car. The lines didn't match. The east fields, the clubhouse, even some of Sunny Pines' fancy homes, they sat on land Joe never lost. Land that was mine. Sleep wasn't coming tonight. I paced the office, lamplight flickering as a moth batted against the bulb. Diane thought she could bulldoze me out of the way, but she didn't know Joe. He'd anticipated her kind, greedy, slick, underestimating a stubborn old farmer. And now I had his weapons, paper, ink, and truth. The worker's note flashed in my mind. The barn could wait till dawn, I'd check it then, see what else Joe stashed. For now, I folded the letter and tucked it in my pocket, a piece of him close to me. "I won't let you down," I whispered to the empty room. Diane Reynolds had walked into a war she didn't see coming, and I was just getting started. The sun was barely up, a thin pink line over the trees, when I drove into Meadow Creek's sleepy downtown. My eyes burned from a night hunched over Grandpa Joe's papers, but adrenaline kept me going. The surveys, the deed, that letter, they were dynamite, proof Sunny Pines was squatting on my land. But I wasn't dumb enough to think I could march up to Diane Reynolds with a stack of old maps and win. I needed a lawyer, someone who knew how to fight her kind. That's how I ended up outside Walter Franklin's office at 8 a.m., clutching a folder and a lukewarm coffee from the gas station. The sign on the door read Franklin Law, Property and Estates, peeling paint curling at the edges. I'd called ahead, and the secretary, a harried woman named Linda, had squeezed me in before lunch, muttering about an emergency. I pushed through the glass door, a bell jingling overhead, and stepped into a room straight out of the 70s, wood-paneled walls, a sagging couch, and a desk drowning in papers. Linda barely glanced up from her typewriter. "He's expecting you," she said, nodding toward a back office. Walter Franklin was older than I'd pictured, pushing 70, with a bow tie askew and thick glasses perched on a nose red from too many years outdoors. He stood as I entered, his chair creaking, and offered a handshake that felt like gripping a tree root. "Alex Richards, huh?" His voice was gravelly, warm. "Heard about your granddad's passing last year. Joe Miller was a good man. Stubborn as hell, too." "Thanks," I said, settling into a chair across from his cluttered desk. "That's why I'm here. Sunny Pines HOA is building on his farm, my farm now. They say they bought it, but I've got proof they're wrong." Walter's eyebrows shot up. "Sunny Pines? That outfit's been stirring trouble since they rolled into town. Let's see what you've got." I spread the documents across his desk, the 1910 survey, the 1978 update, Joe's letter, watching his face as he traced the boundary lines with a gnarled finger. His glasses slipped, and he pushed them back, muttering under his breath. After a long minute, he leaned back, whistling low. "This is a hell of a thing, Alex. According to these, your property stretches half a mile east of what's on the county books now. That's not just the new construction site, that's their clubhouse and 20-odd homes they built 5 years back." "Exactly," I said, leaning forward. "Joe never sold. They're claiming a sale from 9 months ago, when he was dying. Something's off." Walter nodded, tapping the 1910 survey. "Off's an understatement. This is highly unusual. Boundary disputes like this, they don't happen by accident." He grinned suddenly, a glint in his eye. "Reminds me of your granddad back in '82. Developers tried to snatch a chunk of his west pasture for a strip mall. Joe showed up at the county meeting with a surveyor's report and a pitchfork, didn't need the pitchfork, mind you, but it sure made an impression. They backed off quick." I laughed despite myself, picturing Joe, all fire and grit, jabbing at suits with a rusty tine. "Sounds like him. He didn't mess around." "Nope," Walter said, still chuckling. "And neither should you. We've got a shot here, but it won't be simple. Sunny Pines has deep pockets and friends in high places. We need to know how these boundaries got shrunk, and when." He grabbed his phone, an old rotary thing, and dialed the county assessor's office, putting it on speaker. A board clerk picked up, and after some back and forth, we hit pay dirt. "Records show a minor tweak in '84, the clerk droned. 10-foot easement for utilities. But in '97, there's a bigger change, 80 acres lopped off the east side. Just a form, signed by Joseph Miller." "'97? I cut in. "That's impossible. Joe had triple bypass surgery that year, spent the whole month in the hospital. He couldn't have signed anything." Walter's expression darkened, his glasses fogging as he rubbed his eyes. "That's fraud, plain and simple. Forging a signature's a crime, but proving it after 28 years? That's a tall order. So what do we do?" I asked, my voice tight. The thought of someone faking Joe's name while he lay in a hospital bed made my blood boil. "First, we stop those bulldozers," Walter said, scribbling notes on a yellow pad. "I'll file an emergency injunction today, halt construction until a judge can sort this out. Then we petition to restore the original boundaries, based on these surveys. We'll need a pro surveyor to back us up, verify the old maps hold water." I nodded, relief mixing with dread. "How long will that take?" "Days for the injunction, if we're lucky. Weeks, maybe months, for the rest. Sunny Pines won't roll over. Brace yourself, Alex. This could get ugly. Uglier than tearing up my land." I muttered, thinking of Diane's smug face. Walter snorted. "Point taken. But they've got lawyers who'll twist every rule in the book. You're an outsider here, city boy, no ties to Meadow Creek anymore. They'll use that." "Let them try," I said, gripping Joe's letter in my pocket. Joe didn't raise me to quit. Good, Walter replied, stacking my papers. Because you're gonna need that fire. I'll get this filed by noon. Go home, rest up. You look like you haven't slept in a week. He wasn't wrong. I thanked him and stepped outside, the morning air cool against my skin. Meadow Creek's main street stretched quiet around me, hardware store, diner, a barbershop with a faded pole. It felt like a different world from my city life, where horns blared and screens glowed 24/7. But this was Joe's world, and now it was mine to defend. Driving back to the farm, I passed the construction site again. The bulldozers churned on, oblivious to the storm brewing. Diane thought she had me beat, some grieving grandkid she could brush off. She didn't know I had Joe's playbook now, and Walter's know-how. The injunction was step 1. Whatever he'd left in the barn was step 2. I'd check it tonight, under cover of dark. If Joe had more surprises hidden, I'd find them, and use them to bury Sunny Pine's lies. The farmhouse kitchen glowed under a single bulb as I pored over Grandpa Joe's surveys late into the night. The 1910 map lay next to a county printout I'd snagged from my car, their lines clashing like a bad puzzle. 80 acres, gone, sliced off in 1997 with a signature Joe couldn't have written. Fraud, Walter had called it. But who'd pulled it off? And how did Sunny Pines think they could get away with it? I needed more than old papers, I needed to know who I was really up against. Dawn broke gray and damp, mist curling over the fields. Walter's injunction was filed, but it'd take time to stop the bulldozers. I couldn't sit still, so I grabbed my keys and headed to the county records office in Meadow Creek. It was a squat brick building, its lobby smelling of mildew and stale coffee. A clerk with a bored stare handed me a stack of public files on Sunny Pines development after I flashed Joe's deed and mumbled something about property research. She didn't care, just pointed me to a corner table and shuffled off. I dug in, flipping through deeds, permits, and business filings. What I found wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a spiderweb. Sunny Pines wasn't one company but a tangle of LLCs and holding firms, names like Sunshine Holdings and Pinecrest Investments popping up over and over. 6 names tied them together: Diane Reynolds, her husband Thomas Reynolds, County Commissioner James Harris, Planning Board Director Mark Wilson, and 2 others I didn't recognize, probably cronies. They weren't just building houses, they were running a machine. The real kicker came in a loan approval from 3 months back, $16 million to fund Sunny Pines East, with my land listed as collateral. My land, 280 acres Joe never sold, now propping up their luxury empire. I snapped photos with my phone, my hands shaking with anger. This wasn't a mistake. They'd planned it, banking on me being too far away, too busy, to notice. I was about to leave when a shadow fell over the table. An old man in a flannel shirt, his face creased like worn leather, stood there, leaning on a cane. "You Joe Miller's boy?" he rasped, peering at my papers. "Grandson," I said, wary. "Alex Richards." "Who are you?" "Grayson. Used to own the plot south of Joe's." He eased into a chair uninvited, his cane tapping the floor. "Saw you digging through Sunny Pines dirt. Figured you're stirring the same pot I did." "What do you mean?" I asked, closing the folder but keeping it close. He sighed, eyes distant. 5 years back, that HOA ran me off my land. Fined me every week, $200 for my tomato patch, said it wasn't approved landscaping. Then $300 for my workshop, claimed it broke some rule they made up overnight. Kept coming till I couldn't pay no more. Sold for pennies to one of their shell companies. Later found out Diane's husband owns half of M. My jaw tightened. "They harassed you out?" "Yep. And I ain't the only one. Dozen old-timers around here got the same treatment, fines, threats, liens. Sunny Pines swoops in, buys cheap, builds big. Your granddad was next on their list, I reckon. Joe told me once they'd been sniffing around his place for years. Why didn't he sell? I asked, though I knew the answer. Grayson snorted. Joe. He'd rather eat nails. Said they tried everything, cash offers, sweet talk, even sent a slick county fella to twist his arm. He laughed him off. Guess they waited till he was gone to pull this. I leaned back, the pieces clicking. Harassment, forged records, a land grab dressed up as progress. Joe had held them off, but I'd been too buried in my city life to see it coming. Guilt gnawed at me, but anger burned hotter. Thanks, Mr. Grayson, I said, standing. This helps. Watch yourself, he warned, tapping his cane. They don't like folks poking back. I nodded and headed out, the files heavy under my arm. The drive home was quiet, just the hum of tires on asphalt and the chatter in my head. Sunny Pines wasn't just stealing my farm, they'd been preying on Meadow Creek for years, squeezing out people like Grayson, banking on silence. But I wasn't silent anymore. Back at the farmhouse, I spread my haul across the kitchen table, county records next to Joe's surveys, a messy collage of theft. The loan doc stared up at me, $16 million, my land as the anchor. If Walter's injunction worked, their whole deal could collapse. That thought felt good, too good. Diane had power, connections. I needed more ammo. I grabbed my phone and dialed Tanya Williams, editor of the Meadow Creek Gazette. We'd gone to high school together, she'd been a nosy kid with a notebook, always chasing stories. Alex Richards, she answered, her voice bright. Heard you're back. What's up? Investigating Sunny Pines, I said. Might be fraud, big shots involved. Can you look into their approvals? Went through way too fast. She paused, then chuckled. Can't print accusations without proof, but I'll poke around. That development did sail through planning like greased lightning. Give me a day. Thanks, Tanya. I hung up, feeling a spark of hope. The press could shine a light Diane wouldn't like. As dusk settled, I stepped onto the porch, the air thick with the scent of churned dirt from the east fields. The bulldozers were quiet now, but they'd start again tomorrow unless Walter pulled off a miracle. Grayson's story replayed in my mind, fines, pressure, a slow chokehold. Joe had fought that war alone. Now it was mine, and I had his map, his proof, and a growing list of enemies to call out. The barn loomed dark across the yard, its silhouette jagged against the fading sky. That worker's note, Joe left something, itched at me. I'd meant to check it last night, but the box under the floorboard had sidelined me. Tomorrow, I'd go. Whatever Joe hid there, it was another piece of his trap, one Diane and her crew didn't see coming. They thought they'd won when he died. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The Sunny Pines Community Center buzzed like a beehive when I pushed through its glass doors, my folder of documents tucked under my arm. Inside, nearly 100 people filled rows of folding chairs, sipping punch from plastic cups and chattering about tennis courts and fancy new streets. Up front, Diane Reynolds stood tall in a bright red blazer, her smile wide as she clicked through a slideshow of big houses with manicured lawns. Picture the swimming pool with its waterfall feature, she purred, pointing at the screen. Our homes will be worth so much more once these new neighbors move in. Claps rippled through the room, a few folks even whistled. My stomach churned. They were cheering for a lie built on my land, Joe's land. Walter's injunction was still pending, and those bulldozers hadn't stopped. Tonight, I'd make them listen. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and marched down the center aisle, my boots thumping on the tile. Heads turned, whispers spreading like wildfire. Diane's eyes flicked to me, her smile twitching for a split second before snapping back, faker than ever. Excuse me, I said, loud enough to cut through the noise. I need to speak about this development. She didn't miss a beat. We'll take questions after the presentation, she said, voice smooth as glass, waving me off like a pesky fly. This can't wait. I stepped onto the small stage, ignoring the heat of her glare, and faced the crowd. Faces stared back, curious, annoyed, confused. My name's Alex Richards. My grandfather, Joe Miller, owned Willow Creek Farm for 60 years, the land you're calling Sunny Pines East. Diane jumped in fast. The old property we purchased, she said, her tone dripping with pity. Yes, we're grateful to finally develop that eyesore. Murmurs rolled through the room, some nodding, others frowning. I opened my folder and pulled out the 1910 survey, holding it high. This is the original land survey from 1910, I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. And this, I grabbed the 1978 update, is the follow-up. According to these legal documents, my grandfather's farm stretches 80 acres east of what's in the county records now. I turned to the HOA board, 5 stiff suits seated behind Diane, and slapped copies down in front of each. You're building on land that's mine. And not just the new site, 20 of your existing homes and that clubhouse back there. They're on my property too. The room exploded. Voices shouted over each other, chairs scraping as people stood. Someone knocked over a stack of cups, pink punch pooling on the floor. This is ridiculous. Diane yelled, snatching a survey from the table, her face flushing red. We have permits. We've sold lots. Construction's underway. I kept calm, letting her unravel. Your permits are based on fake boundaries. I filed with the court to stop all building, effective immediately. That was a stretch. Walter's injunction wasn't through yet, but it hit hard. Gerald Fisher, the balding HOA treasurer with thick glasses, grabbed a survey, his hands trembling. Diane, he whispered, loud enough for the mic to catch, these markers line up with the old creek bed. They look real. She yanked the papers from him, her perfect nails digging into the edges. This is a trick, a scam to squeeze money out of us. We'll fight this nonsense. Her voice cracked, just enough to show the strain. I pulled out Joe's letter, holding it like a shield. Here's something else. My grandfather never sold. If he had, why'd he leave me proof you're trespassing? And one more thing, Diane, your house, the big one on Pineview Lane. It's smack in the middle of my land too. The air went still, like someone sucked it out of the room. People gaped, heads swiveling between me and Diane. 20 families, folks who'd bought homes, raised kids, mowed lawns, might not own the ground they stood on. A man in the back shot up, his tie loose. You saying we could lose our houses? Before I could answer, a young woman near the front stood, her voice shaking but firm. I'm Rachel Winters. I put my life savings into a lot in the new section. Diane, you told us it was secure, guaranteed. What's going on? Her eyes were wide, desperate, and the crowd leaned in, hungry for Diane's reply. Diane's composure slipped, her lips parting like she'd been slapped. This meeting's over, she barked, slamming her hand on the podium. Everyone out. The board needs to discuss this privately. Her voice was shrill now, a far cry from the polished sales pitch she'd started with. People shuffled out, whispering furiously, some clutching my photocopied surveys I'd handed out. Rachel grabbed my arm as the room thinned. I'm not trying to hurt regular people, I told her, meaning it. This is about fixing what's wrong. Don't listen to him, Diane hissed, suddenly beside us, her perfume sharp in the air. She leaned close, her face inches from mine. You have no idea who you're messing with. I built Sunny Pines from nothing. Nobody takes it from me. Her threat hung there, cold and heavy, as she stormed off, heels clicking like gunshots. I was alone now, the empty room echoing with the ghost of the chaos. Through the windows, I saw clusters of homeowners in the parking lot, arguing, pointing at my papers. My phone buzzed. Walter. How'd it go? I texted back, they know now. Get ready for their next move. I sank into a chair, the folder limp in my hands. My heart raced, a mix of triumph and dread. I'd lit a match tonight, watched it flare in Diane's eyes, but I wasn't ready for the firestorm coming. These weren't just lines on a map, they were people's homes, dreams Diane had sold them. Rachel's face stuck with me, scared, betrayed. I didn't want to crush her, but Joe's land wasn't hers to claim either. Diane thought she could scare me off, but she'd misread me. Joe hadn't raised a quitter. That worker's note, check the old barn, nagged at me still. I'd hit the barn tomorrow, dig up whatever Joe left. Tonight proved I could shake them, but Diane's venom meant war. She'd fight dirty, and I had to be ready. The trap was tightening, and she didn't even know she was caught in it yet. I jolted awake to the growl of engines outside the farmhouse, my heart slamming against my ribs. Bright lights stabbed through the curtains, slicing the pre-dawn dark. I stumbled to the porch in my socks, the wood cold underfoot, and froze. 3 white SUVs with Sunny Pine security painted on their doors sat in a row, blocking my driveway like a barricade. Men in crisp uniforms stood by the vehicles, their flashlights sweeping the yard. One stepped forward, a thick envelope in his gloved hand. Cease and desist notice from the Sunny Pines Homeowners Association, he said, voice flat as a robot. You're ordered to withdraw all claims against the development or face legal action. He shoved the envelope at me and turned back to his SUV, but none of them drove off. I tore it open, my breath fogging in the chilly air. The letter was a wall of legal jargon, accusing me of fraud, claiming my surveys were fakes, and demanding I pay for damages to the community's reputation. I laughed, bitter and loud. You can't be serious, I called after the guy. He shrugged, not even looking back. Just delivering the message. Have a nice day. Nice day. I glanced past him and saw why they weren't leaving. Overnight, they'd dropped massive concrete blocks across the end of my driveway, gray slabs stacked like a fortress wall. I tried driving to town for breakfast, but my car wasn't budging past that. Sorry, sir, one guard said, smirking. This access point's not approved by the development committee. Closed for safety. Trapped. On my own damn property. I called the sheriff's office, pacing the porch as the line rang. Civil dispute, the deputy drawled after I explained. Get a lawyer. We can't touch it. I hung up, fuming, and my phone lit up again, Diane's name flashing. I hadn't given her my number. I answered, bracing myself. Good morning, she chirped, sweet as poison. Enjoying the view? This is harassment, I snapped. You can't block my driveway. Actually, she said, according to county records, the real ones, that path crosses Sunny Pines common areas. We control access. Perfectly legal. Those records are forged, and you know it. She laughed, low and sharp. Let me break it down for you, Alex. The county commissioner golfs with my husband every Sunday. The building inspector's daughter works for my real estate firm. The water supervisor lives in Sunny Pines. By tomorrow, your farmhouse will rack up 15 code violations. Your water might get shut off, maintenance issues, you see. Local contractors won't touch your calls. That's how this works. You can't win. My stomach sank, but I kept my voice steady. That's illegal. That's small-town politics, dear. Drop your claims, sign over the disputed acres, and this stops. I'll even toss in a fat check for your trouble. Think it over. You've got till tomorrow. The line went dead. I stared at the security vehicles, their lights still sweeping the fields. She wasn't bluffing. By noon, a county inspector showed up, clipboard in hand, tie crooked, muttering about anonymous complaints. He poked around the farmhouse, scribbling violations, faulty wiring, a shaky porch rail, a septic tank out of compliance. The list he handed me would cost thousands to fix, all due immediately. As he drove off, a truck rolled in, workers hammering signs along my property line, future home of Sunny Pines East, luxury living coming soon. Then the water slowed to a dribble. I called the utility company, same story, maintenance work, no ETA. I tried ordering a pizza that night, the driver claimed he couldn't find the address, though I'd gotten deliveries here for years. Step by step, they were cutting me off, choking me out like they'd done to Grayson and the others. I was hauling a bucket from the creek, arms aching, when a beat-up sedan pulled up near the concrete blocks. A nervous kid climbed out, glancing at the security guards, and tossed a small package over the barrier. It landed in the dirt with a thud, a padded envelope, no label. I grabbed it and retreated inside, my pulse racing. In the kitchen, I ripped it open. A battered tape recorder tumbled out, the kind Joe used to log crop notes, along with a scribbled note, found this in the barn. Thought you'd want it. J. The worker from the site, had to be. I'd never made it to the barn, sidetracked by the office box, but he'd gone for me. My hands shook as I hit play. Joe's voice crackled through, rough but alive. October 12, 2023. That Sunny Pines fella came again, Thomas Reynolds this time, Diane's husband. Offered me 50 grand for an easement, said it'd help the community. I told him to shove it. Kept pushing papers at me, but I didn't sign. Next day, he was back, hinting they'd find a way if I didn't play ball. Sounded like a threat. Recording this in case they try something dirty. The tape hissed to a stop. I replayed it, Joe's words sinking in. Threats. Blackmail. Evidence Diane didn't know I had. My mind spun, Thomas Reynolds, a name from the LLC filings, caught on tape bullying a dying man. This could bury them. That night, I sat on the porch in the dark, the security lights painting the fields in eerie stripes. The bulldozers loomed silent in the distance, waiting to finish Joe's legacy. My phone buzzed, Walter. They've countersued. Say your docs are forged. Court date in 3 months. They'll keep building till then. 3 months. By then, the houses would be up, the damage done. I scrolled my contacts, desperate for a lifeline. Janet Rivera's name caught my eye, a high school friend, now a reporter. I hesitated, then dialed. Alex, she answered, sleepy but curious. It's late. I need help, I said. Sunny Pines is screwing me, and half this town. Can you dig into them? Big ask, she said, waking up fast. Got proof. Getting there. Start with Diane Reynolds and Thomas. They're dirty. She whistled. Okay, I'm in. Give me time. I thanked her and hung up, the tape recorder heavy in my lap. Diane thought she could crush me into submission. Instead, she'd handed me Joe's voice, a weapon she didn't see coming. Tomorrow, I'd fight back harder. She'd underestimated the wrong Miller. The next morning, my water was gone, pipes dry as bone. By noon, the electricity flickered out, leaving the farmhouse dark and the fridge warm with spoiled food. Diane Reynolds wasn't playing games, she wanted me miserable, cornered, ready to sign her deal. I stood in the kitchen, staring at a carton of sour milk, and felt the walls closing in. But Joe's tape recorder sat on the table, his voice still echoing in my head, they'll try something dirty. He'd been right. And I wasn't running. I grabbed a notebook and stormed out, the concrete blocks mocking me as I climbed over them on foot. If Diane thought she could bully me off my land, she'd underestimated the fight in me, and the people she'd pissed off along the way. First stop, Mrs. Thompson's place, a half-mile down the road. She answered the door in a flowered housecoat, her eyes widening at my sweaty, dirt-streaked face. "They shut off your utilities," she gasped, pulling me inside. "That's illegal." "So's building on my land," I said, dropping into a chair. "But Diane's got the county in her pocket. I need names, folks who hate the HOA as much as we do." Her face lit up, a spark of mischief in her wrinkles. "Oh, honey, grab a pen. This'll take a while." Over tea, sweet and cold, a lifeline in my parched throat, she rattled off 15 names: families fined for dumb rules, old couples threatened with liens for grandkids visiting too often, a single mom hit with a $900 bill for a toddler's fence. "They're scared," she said, "but they're mad too. You just gotta wake 'em up." I spent the day knocking on doors across Sunny Pines, my notebook filling with stories. At first, people were cagey, peeking through curtains, voices low like Diane might hear. But when I showed Joe's surveys, proof her empire was crumbling, something shifted. Hope cracked through their fear. Sarah Jenkins, a wiry woman with calloused hands, invited me in for lemonade. "Diane made my husband rip out our tomatoes," she said, her voice shaking. "Said veggies weren't pretty enough. Fined us $500. He works 2 jobs, we can't afford that." Her eyes burned. I'd love to see her squirm. The Patel family had fought over a porch swing, $3,000 in legal fees to keep it, only for the HOA to tear it down anyway. "It's not just rules," Trevor Martinez told me, his wife Maria nodding beside him. "It's how they do it." Diane drives around snapping pictures, some get warnings, others get slammed. No rhyme or reason. By sunset, I'd talked to 27 families, their anger a chorus echoing Grayson's tale. Sunny Pines wasn't just stealing my land, they've been grinding down this town for years. I called Walter from Mrs. Thompson's porch, the sky bruising purple. "Can we form our own homeowners group, legally? On your land?" "Damn right," he said, chuckling. "Even the existing homes could join if they ditch Sunny Pines. Risky, but doable." "What's the play?" "Community center, tomorrow night," I said. "It's on my property, per the surveys. I'm calling a meeting." He laughed. "They'll hate that. I'll draft papers. Good luck." Next day, I printed 200 flyers, emergency community meeting, your home may be at risk, with copies of Joe's survey stapled on. I handed them out like a paperboy, slipping them under doors, tacking them to poles. As night fell, the center filled beyond capacity. 97 families crammed in, chairs gone, folks leaning against walls. Diane stormed in last, pushing through the crowd, her face twisted with rage. "This is unauthorized," she shouted. "Leave now." Sarah Jenkins stood, fists clenched. "Or what? More fines? You've taken enough." The room erupted in applause, a wave of defiance crashing over Diane's glare. I stepped to the front, hands up for quiet. "I didn't come to cause trouble," I started, voice steady. "I came for my grandfather's land, stolen land. But after meeting you, I see I'm not the only victim." For an hour, people spilled their guts, fines for wrong mailboxes, kids' toys banned, gardens bulldozed. Tears fell, voices broke. Diane sat in the back, typing furiously on her phone, her mask slipping. "Here's my plan," I said when they'd finished. "We formed the Meadow Creek Homeowners Coalition. We redraw fair property lines, write rules that make sense, keep finances open. Together, we fight back." "You can't," Diane yelled, jumping up. "These homes are locked into Sunny Pines by contract. Contracts built on fraud don't hold," I shot back, holding up the survey. "I'm not here to take homes, just fix what's broken." The vote was a landslide, 89 families joined on the spot, signing a sheet I passed around. People left buzzing, hopeful for the first time in years. As the crowd thinned, Gerald Fisher, the HOA treasurer, sidled up, glancing nervously at Diane across the room. "There's something you should know," he whispered. "The finances don't add up. Dues keep rising, but reserves shrink. I've asked questions, Diane shuts me down. She controls it all." "Show me," I said, pulse quickening. "Tomorrow, my office," he nodded, then slipped away. Diane stormed over, finger jabbing my chest. "You've made a terrible mistake. By tomorrow, you'll wish you'd never set foot here. I've got the commissioner, the police chief, the judge on speed dial. This ends now." "A threat, Ms. Reynolds?" I asked, cool as I could manage. "A promise." She spun and slammed the door, the bang echoing in the empty hall. Then a surprise, Mrs. Elsie Carter, a tiny woman with white hair and a surveyor's pin on her jacket, tapped my shoulder. "Heard your speech," she said, voice crisp. "Retired surveyor, 30 years. I'll map your land for free, prove Joe's surveys hold. Saw them filling wetlands out there too, illegal as hell." I grinned, stunned. "You're hired." My phone buzzed, "Walter. Environmental reports in. Wetlands confirmed. Big leverage." I smiled. Diane thought she had the power, but I had an army now, Sarah's fury, Gerald's books, Elsie's maps, and Joe's truth. She'd built her trap tight, but I was turning it on her. Tomorrow, I'd see Gerald, get Elsie out there. The tide was shifting, and Diane didn't even know how deep she'd sunk. I woke to flashing lights outside the farmhouse, red and blue pulsing through the dawn mist. My stomach dropped as I yanked on a hoodie and stepped onto the porch. 2 police cars flanked Diane's sleek black SUV, her red blazer glowing under the security floodlights. Chief Williams, a tall man with a buzz cut and a permanent scowl, strode up, Diane smirking at his side. "Alex Richards," he barked, "you're trespassing on private property. Step off, or we'll remove you." I forced a smile, clutching Joe's folder. "Morning, Chief. Actually, I'm the legal owner here." I handed him the stack, 1910 survey, 1978 update, Joe's deed, watching his frown deepen as he flipped through. Diane snatched a page, her face paling. "These haven't been verified." "They have now," a voice called. Carolyn Mitchell, a sharp-eyed woman in a county blazer, stepped from an unmarked car I hadn't noticed. "County Records Office. We pulled the originals last night after some concerning reports." She spread maps across my porch table, her tone clipped. The 1973 boundary shift was a clerical error. Then 97, 80 acres gone, signature forged. This land, including Sunny Pines homes and new site, belongs to the Richards estate. Diane's jaw tightened, but Chief Williams whistled. "That's a mess." "Not just a mistake, huh?" "Not a mistake," Walter said, strolling up with a briefcase, his bow tie crooked from the rush. "We've got evidence it was deliberate." He nodded at me, and I slid Gerald's financial folder across. 3 years of Sunny Pines HOA books, Chief. Look at this, $427,000 in dues funneled to Sunshine Consulting LLC, registered to Diane's son-in-law. Landscaping, security, legal, all siphoned to her family's firms. Diane slammed the table. "That's our management company. Legitimate expenses." "Legitimate?" I said, pulling out Joe's tape recorder. "Let's hear this." I hit play, and Joe's gravelly voice filled the air. October 14, 2023. Thomas Reynolds came back. Offered $100,000 to sign off the East Fields, said I'd regret saying no. Caught him on tape hinting at adjusting records if I didn't. No deal. The tape hissed out, and silence fell like a hammer. Chief Williams' eyes narrowed. Ms. Reynolds, we need you at the station. Now. Diane sputtered, this is absurd. My husband golfs with Judge Harrington. But the chief grabbed her arm, leading her off as she hissed threats. Carolyn turned to me. What about the homes? No evictions, I said. But the building stops till we sort this out, and protect the wetlands. By afternoon, construction halted, news vans clogging the road. My phone rang non-stop, homeowners, scared and furious. I called a town hall that night at the high school auditorium, the only place big enough. Nearly 400 packed in, Sunny Pines families, laid-off workers, county suits, curious locals. The air crackled with fear and rage as I stepped to the mic, sweat beading on my neck. I'm Alex Richards, I started, voice echoing. This was my grandfather's land. I didn't come for trouble, I came to honor him. Shouts cut me off. What about our homes? I'll sue. My savings are gone. I raised my hands. Please, I'm not here to take anything. I've got a plan to fix this. The room quieted, skeptical but listening. First, every existing homeowner gets a legal deed to your property, no one loses their house. Murmurs of relief spread. Second, the new development gets redesigned. Joe's environmental studies, and Mrs. Elsie Carter's survey, show wetlands out there, home to endangered species. Building on them's illegal under federal law. We protect them, with trails and signs for everyone to enjoy. A man stood, voice shaky. I bought a lot in the new section, my life savings. What now? Fair question, I said. We'll set up a property exchange, swap your lot for one in the redesigned plan. No losses. I clicked to a slide of Joe's wetland notes, his handwriting shaky but clear. These aren't just swamps, they stop floods, save homes. Sunny Pines ignored that. We won't. For an hour, I laid it out, smaller homes, green spaces, solar panels, fair rules, open books. No more fines for tomatoes or swings. Sarah Jenkins took the mic, her voice raw. 8 years under Diane, I couldn't paint my door blue, grow a garden, let my kids play past 7. Is that what we want? Heads shook, a ripple of no's spreading. A construction worker stood next. I'm out of a job now. What's your fix? I nodded. The new plan needs workers, same pay, better purpose. You're not sidelined. He sat, grumbling but mollified. As the night wound down, 300 signed up for the Meadow Creek Community Association. Gerald joined, promising to untangle the HOA's mess. Even some of Diane's old allies switched, tired of her reign. Rachel Winters approached, eyes red. I believed her guarantees. Thanks for not screwing us. I'm not the enemy here, I said. She was. Outside, Elsie handed me her report, wetlands confirmed, violations galore. Federal regulators will love this, she grinned. Janet Rivera slipped up too, notebook in hand. Caught it all, tape, finances, Diane's meltdown. Front page tomorrow. I drove home under a starry sky, the farmhouse quiet without security lights. Diane's lawyers would fight, Thomas's bribe on tape was a felony blow, but the evidence was ironclad. Joe's trap had sprung, not just on her but on a system that let her thrive. I'd won the day, but the war wasn't over. Still, 300 signatures, Elsie's maps, Janet's ink, they were armor Joe couldn't have dreamed of. I'd finish what he started, fair and square. A year later, I sit on Grandpa Joe's porch, the wood creaking under me like it always did. The evening sun dips low, painting the sky gold, and kids zip by on bikes, their laughter bouncing off houses with doors in every color, blue, red, even a wild purple down the street. Across the road, the community garden hums with life, Sarah Jenkins bends over her tomato plants, chatting with neighbors swapping tips and zucchini. Behind me, the farmhouse buzzes too, not with silence anymore, but with voices from a knitting class spilling out the open door. It's not just a house now, it's Meadow Creek's heart. It wasn't easy getting here. Diane's lawyers fought like cornered dogs after that town hall, throwing motions and countersuits to dodge the noose. But Joe's tape, Thomas Reynolds caught offering a bribe, cracked their spine. Fraud charges piled up, forged boundaries, embezzled dues, wetland violations. Elsie's survey nailed them for. Diane took a plea deal 6 months back, probation, fines, her empire stripped. Thomas got 2 years, the golf buddies couldn't save him. Sunny Pines HOA dissolved, its shell companies unraveling like cheap thread. I didn't gloat. Winning wasn't about revenge, it was about fixing what they broke. The Meadow Creek Community Association took root fast. We redrew the lines, every homeowner got a deed, no one displaced. The East Fields shrank to 150 homes, not 96 mansions, smaller, affordable, with solar panels winking in the sun and green spaces where kids play tag. The wetlands stayed sacred, a conservation easement locking them tight. Elsie's trails wind through now, wooden signs naming the herons and frogs Joe loved, teaching folks what he fought for. I sip lemonade Mrs. Thompson hands me, her smile crinkling her eyes. Your granddad would be bursting, she says, pointing east where construction hums again, sustainable, slow, right. He'd love those trails. Used to drag me out there to watch the birds. He'd love this too, I say, nodding at the farmhouse. After the dust settled, I couldn't let it sit empty. I turned it into a community center, classes, meetings, potlucks every month. But last week, I added something else. Found this while cleaning his study, I tell her, pulling out a faded notebook. Joe's journal, 30 years old, ink smudged but legible. I flip it open. He fought developers back then too, 95, when they tried the wetlands first. Drove M off with a lawyer and a petition. Mrs. Thompson laughs, sharp and bright. Stubborn as a mule, that man. Said you were just like him, bullheaded when it mattered. She's right. That journal sparked an idea. I cleared Joe's office, kept the tobacco smell, the creaky chair, and made it a museum. Glass cases hold his surveys, the tape recorder, photos from the box, Joe with neighbors, hoe in hand, grinning by the creek. A timeline on the wall traces the farm from 1910 to now, ending with clippings from Janet's front-page exposé that broke Diane's fall. Kids wander in sometimes, wide-eyed, asking about the farmer who beat the bad guys. I tell M. Joe's stories, the ones he told me under these stars. The fight cost me. I quit my city job, couldn't juggle it with court dates and town halls. Sold my apartment, moved here full-time. Some nights, I miss the chaos of traffic and takeout, but then I step outside, smell the damp earth, hear the creek gurgle, and it fades. This is home now, not just Joe's but mine. Not everyone's happy. A few Sunny Pines diehards grumbled about outsiders meddling, but most came around. Rachel Winters runs the garden co-op, her new lot snug in the redesigned plan. Gerald's treasurer again, books open for all. The workers who lost jobs under Diane. They're back, building homes that don't choke the land. Even Chief Williams tips his hat when he passes, grudging, but there. I stand, stretching, and walk to the garden. Sarah waves me over, handing me a ripe tomato, warm from the sun. Couldn't do this under Diane, she says, grinning. You gave us room to breathe. Just finished what Joe started, I say, biting into it, sweet, messy, real. Beyond her, a blue heron lifts off from the marsh, wings cutting the sky. I think of Joe's journal, his last entry from 95, they'll try again. Truth's the best trap, let M walk into it. Diane did, thinking she'd outsmart a dead farmer. She didn't see me, or this town, waiting to spring it. Back on the porch, Mrs. Thompson joins me, her lemonade glass clinking against mine. What's next, Alex? Dunno, I say, watching the heron vanish. Keep the museum going, maybe write Joe's story. This place runs itself now. It does, council meetings hum, kids chase fireflies, the wetlands breathe. Diane tried to steal a legacy, instead, she gave me one. Not land or victory, but people, roots I didn't know I needed. The stars blink on, same as they did when Joe spun tales here. I hear his voice in the wind sometimes, gruff and proud, this farm's our blood, Alex. Never let it go. I haven't. I turned his trap into something better, a community, not a cage. Diane's HOA wanted profit, I built a home. And every colored door, every tomato vine, every kid's laugh proves it, the best legacy isn't catching the bad guys, it's showing them a better way to live. Hey, folks. That's the end of Alex and Grandpa Joe's wild ride, of grit, heart, and a little small-town justice. I hope you loved watching Meadow Creek rise from the ashes as much as I loved writing it. What do you think, did Diane get what she deserved? Should Alex have pushed harder or played nicer? Drop your thoughts below, I'm dying to hear them. If this story hooked you, don't stop here. Hit that like button to let me know you're Team Richards, and subscribe for more tales of underdogs kicking butt and taking names. Share it with your crew, let's get more folks in on the fight. Got ideas for what Alex should tackle next? Toss them my way, I'm always up for a new trap to spring. Big thanks for sticking with me through every bulldozer, survey, and shady deal. You're the real MVPs, making this journey worth it. Catch you in the next one, stay stubborn, stay true, and keep fighting for what's yours.